America. My name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Thursday about this time, and today I'm going to talk to you about how black people are played for fools. And we are played for fools because we're vulnerable to everything, right? So when people say that climate change is going to happen, it's going to disproportionately affect black people. COVID, the shutdowns disproportionately affect black people. The disease itself disproportionately affects black people. And job loss in America disproportionately affects black people. The dubious financial practices of our major banks disproportionately predate on black people. Anything that's broken in America disproportionately breaks black people and black communities. The thing is, our community infrastructures have been attacked. We're targeted since their emergence in America, right? The black family's always been a target for state intervention and state destruction and state policing. The black church, the same way. The black church is what it is because it's the church that the white people let us have, right? And I say the same thing about the NOI. The Nation of Islam is what it is because it's the variety of Islam that white people let black people have. I'm going to get in some heat because of that, but that's just what it is. So our institutions are disproportionately vulnerable, but they've been disproportionately made vulnerable so that they could be susceptible to interests that are not necessarily our own, right? So the big problem I wanted to talk about today was how that vulnerability gets weaponized by all of these other particular interest groups, right? So for example, the LGBTQAI crowd will say that, no, it's a black person. You have to really care about LGBTQ AI issues because those issues, the violence and the degradation that's heaped upon that community disproportionately affects black people. So does everything else. So does everything else. So our vulnerability gets weaponized for interests that are not addressing our vulnerability. What we need to talk about is why is it the case that black people are vulnerable to everything? Why are we vulnerable to everything? And let's address that and let that be the target. And so that's why the reparations conversation is, one, supremely relevant, and two, always degraded by other people who, like us, disproportionately vulnerable. It's good for the labor movement to have us disproportionately vulnerable to labor swings. It's good for the climate justice movement to have black people disproportionately vulnerable to climate change and environmentalism in general. It's good for the abortion movement, for the pro-choice abortion movement, to have birth control disproportionately affect black lives, or they have restricted access to birth control disproportionately affect black lives. It's good for the feminist movement, for black women to divorce their husbands. We're trying to pretend that the stories we tell ourselves, or we've been allowed to tell ourselves about Tina and Ike, are about black people as opposed to about what the feminist movement needed black love to be. So all of these other ancillary movements with particular interests that in some ways intersect, in some ways converge, and in some ways actually antagonistic against, like the conditions for black community uplift and autonomy, end up exploiting and then undermining the conditions for black autonomy. Because the only conversation we should have, or the first conversation we should have, is why are we so vulnerable? Why are we so vulnerable? What happened? What did America do? What did America and all of its subordinate institutions in the public and private sector, what did they do to black cultural and institutional life so that we are so vulnerable to everything? And that should be the issue. And then we could go at the things that we are vulnerable about. Right? You treat the AIDS before you treat the pneumonia that then takes advantage of your compromised immune system. Right? We got to deal with our compromised immune system and have that be their problem. And this is an argument that doesn't get talked about enough. And I do not want black politics to be reduced to every other person's politics that then gets to take advantage of black vulnerability. I want black politics to be, what are we going to do about black systemic vulnerability? Right? So we get the very important distinction that needs to be made before the climate justice people, before the feminists, before the blank and blank, before the labor activists, before the Urban League, before everybody else says the line, well, you have to care about our issue because our issue disproportionately affects black people. Before the criminal justice advocates, all of that. All of it's true. All of it disproportionately affects and degrades black life. However, we need to deal with why black life and black community institutions are so vulnerable in general to all of the things. Or else we're just playing whack-a-mole with someone else's politics. Except we're both the whacker and the mole. And that's not appropriate. That is not appropriate. That's not anything consistent with self-determination. And I'm going to give you some solutions after I hit the beat. By the way, if you appreciate what I'm doing, which you should, because you're not going to hear a lot of people on YouTube talk like this, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50. All right, let me hit the opening.
To the beat, y'all. Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front. To the beat, y'all.
So if you missed the opening, black people are played for fools because our disproportionate community-wide vulnerability is then exploited by other people who happen to have similar interests in some ways to distract us from the problem, our major problem, which is we are vulnerable to every other malady that affects society. That is the black situation. The black situation is nothing other than being vulnerable. Well, there's other things, but it includes being vulnerable to every other social malady. We're like the bubble boy, living in a world full of pollution. We need to deal with, we need to talk about and make a national issue out of black vulnerability in general, so that we shouldn't be disproportionately vulnerable to all of social ills. Like things that kind of affect the white family shouldn't just destroy the black family. Things that kind of affect the white economy shouldn't just destroy the black economy. Things that just kind of affect the white water supply shouldn't just destroy or make completely unpotable the black water supply. Right? So things that just kind of destroy, black finances, white ownership and white finances shouldn't just destroy black ownership and black finances. And that is the real problem, this vulnerability. And that's a problem that doesn't get addressed. And until we address it, then we'll always just kind of be playthings. And that means in order to address this, we need to be willing to tick off the whites, because they're going to come and say like, well, you have to fight for our issue. And we have to say, like, no, we're not going to fight for your issue until you deal with our vulnerability in general. We're not going to fight for your little climate. We're not going to fight for your environmental legacy. We're not going to fight for your climate advocacy. We're not going to fight for your feminist advocacy. We're just not going to fight for your issue until you deal with our community-wide vulnerability. And they'll say like, but you're just hurting yourselves. And that's true, but we got to be used to the pain. So we have to be willing to cause them pain, and then eating going to be like, you can't ignore it. It's privilege, blah, blah, climate just blah, blah, blah. Because, but I also care about black people being vulnerable in general. And until you're willing to actually fight for black people not being vulnerable in general, and I'm not just talking about to the police. I mean, I even care about police justice, kind of, but I'm also tired of black issues being reduced to issues with the cops. Like, we talk about police justice because that any of the economic benefits, good healthcare policies, good policing policies, that just keeps you alive to be exploited. Keeps you alive and outside. Right? So I want black people to fight for the policies that actually empower us, not just keep us in palliative care. palliative advocacy is just so. If you take anything from this lesson about X, they're away from what you should care about is which is why black people are disproportionately affected by everything, and what are the conditions to redress that. All right, so we need to talk about reparations. Unless they're talking about reparations, I'm not going to talk about their issue. You get some carve-outs for labor issues, but pretty much, unless they're talking about reparations, they're just using black vulnerability to get you to advocate for their issue. And that's not going to actually make black people free. All right, thank you for your time. If you appreciate what I'm saying, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com, which I think you should, because like I said, a lot of people don't get paid to talk the way I'm talking. People don't get paid to talk the way I'm talking. People get paid. Hold on. So the stream, there seems to be something with the stream. I don't know what to say about that. I'll go and check and see what's going on. But people don't get paid to talk the way I'm talking. People get paid to deny this. If there's a real problem with the stream, I'll just do this show later again tonight. It's a good topic. It should be put out clearly. Take care. I will see you